I'm John Batchelor. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com is here with me. China in Canada, the Communist Party in Canada. Because when we say China, I want to be very clear. We're talking about the governance of China. The Communist Party is a dictatorship. There is no legitimacy. There is no vote. And democracy is what the communists fear. We welcome our colleague, Charles Burton of Brock University, recently asked to respond to questions from the Canadian House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. The subject was Hong Kong. We know Gordon and his colleagues have reported these last months of the protests of the people in Hong Kong because the mainland Communist Party has broken the promises it made over the last decades to move towards democracy soon enough. 2017, I believe, is the date. And the disappointment is obvious when you talk to Hong Kong. What about it in Canada can be done? Charles, a very good evening to you. In your testimony to the House of Commons, the questions, are they well informed about the disappointment of the democracy in Hong Kong? Good evening to you.
Good evening. Well, Canada has a strong connection with Hong Kong because of the common British imperial background. And in fact, the Canadian consulate in Hong Kong estimates that there are 295,000 Canadian citizens resident in Hong Kong. Actually, we estimate that there are more than that because a number have not identified themselves with the Consulate General. And there are close to 500,000 persons of Hong Kong origin resident in Canada. So I think that the people in Hong Kong who are concerned about the future of democracy in Hong Kong and concerned about civil liberties in Hong Kong, such as freedom of the press and freedom of school curriculum, that kind of thing, are looking to Canada because Canada is seen as a place that has a traditional connection with Hong Kong. And I think that they hope that Canada will take the lead in the global community to monitor the Chinese government's implementation of the Sino-British Declaration that led to the transfer of Hong Kong sovereignty to China and the basic law that elaborates on that. The bottom line is that in the view of the government of Canada, the People's Republic of China's sovereignty over Hong Kong is limited by this international agreement that was signed between the British and the Chinese, but also endorsed by a number of other countries before being registered with the United Nations, and one of those countries was Canada.
Charles, well, congratulations for testifying before the committee. What was the gist of your testimony?
Well, to me, I think that it's important that Canada should be readjusting our policy towards China in light of the reports that the Chinese government has been cracking down on freedom of the press, NGOs, student movements, protests, civil protests, and because China's domestically, China has had a human rights crackdown, as we know, we've discussed on this program before, against Western ideas, democracy, civil society, and so on. So the Canadian policy towards China has three different aspects to it. The first is we want to promote our prosperity through trade with China. Secondly, we want to protect our security, including our concerns over Chinese espionage in Canada. And thirdly, which makes us different from some other countries, is we want to project Canadian values in our foreign relations with China. And I think it's in this third that our previous policies of trying to encourage China to move towards a more democratic system have clearly failed. And it's time for us to be a bit more vocal and to engage in more constructive programming to do what little Canada can do to stand on the side of those people in China who are being denied their universal entitlements to human rights.
Shorter version, peaceful rise didn't work out. Is Canada alarmed? Is the government alarmed?
I think the Canadian government is concerned about particularly the increasing influence of the Chinese state in Canada. Our former head of our security service made a statement that his service has identified a number of Canadian officials who seem to be under the influence of the Chinese state. In other words, they're receiving benefits for not acting in the interests of Canada in their political decisions, but responding to Chinese government interests. And that's of grave concern to us. And we've had very serious problems with cyber espionage, including hacking of Canadian government computers twice in the past 3 years that have seriously impacted our operations, not to speak of problems of economic espionage and that kind of thing, which damages our interest but benefits China.
Charles, also testifying today was Martin Lee, who is considered by many to be one of the leading figures in the democracy movement in Hong Kong. And also you had Joshua Wong of Scholarism, a student leader. What did they have to say?
Well, I think that Mr. Lee is a person of great integrity who described the situation, the expectations at the time of the transfer that, in fact, there would be 50 years of no change, that it would be Hong Kong people allowed to govern themselves, a high degree of autonomy, and that they would move towards the universal elections under the one country, two systems rubric, and this clearly has not worked out. I think that, within our own parliament, one of the parties, the Liberal Party, sought to discredit Mr. Lee to some extent by suggesting that his characterization of the promises of the Sino-British Declaration are in fact being fulfilled by the government of China, even though I think to most right-minded people that's evidently not the case. So, Mr. Lee is a figure in Canada that is controversial because Canadian business and political parties are afraid to show contact with him because the Chinese government made a statement suggesting that if the Canadian side holds this parliamentary hearing on Hong Kong affairs, it would send wrong signals to the outside world and could cause disturbance to China-Canada relations. So obviously they did not want Mr. Lee to speak out in the Canadian Parliament and sent this unprecedented letter attempting to interfere with a Canadian parliamentary process.
The Liberal Party, what's in it for them? Why take up the Chinese Communist Party's complaint?
Well, the current leader of the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau, is the son of Pierre Trudeau, who had a great deal of affection for both Fidel Castro, who attended his funeral a few years ago, and for Chairman Mao. And I think that that's part of it. The other larger element is that Canadian companies who are doing extensive business with Chinese communist business networks have been inclined to support the Liberal Party financially and other ways. And so it seems that, to my mind, that the Liberal Party is really much more pro-mainland China than is in the Canadian interest.
Gordon, isn't there a very large Chinese community diaspora in Canada, especially in British Columbia?
And especially in Toronto, where Lydia's, my wife's parents and family live.
So what we're looking at is a very hot issue for the Canadian government. This is not something just about trade. It's also about people who live here.
And many people of Hong Kong origin live in Canada.
Charles,
we estimate about 500,000 Hong Kong Chinese in Canada, and at least 300,000 and possibly 500,000 Canadian citizens resident presently in Hong Kong. So it's a significant group. But as you point out, the more recent Canadian immigrants from China are mainland Chinese who speak Mandarin and tend to be sympathetic with the mainland Chinese government. So we have a split in our Chinese community.
Charles Burton at Brock University, Gordon Chang, Forbes.com. I'm John Batchelor.